I'm Will Hedrick.
And I'm Jordan Schaffer.
And this is Dog Ears and Timestamps, a book club podcast.
We're bringing reading back.
Bringing it back. That's our tagline. We're going to bring the reading back to the kiddos.
Speaking of that, though, how was your reading, Will? Like, where did you read? How did you read? How was the book?
I put it off. I could do everything in my life. And then Friday night, or no, I'm sorry, not Friday night, Saturday night, this past Saturday, 2 days ago, Saturday, I decided I was going to read before I went to sleep. So I just laid in bed and read the 3 chapters.
Yeah, I have issues laying in bed reading just because if I'm horizontal, I just go to sleep. So
true, yeah.
Yeah, I'd been taking the book in a little differently. We had been talking about this a little bit before, just how like ingesting the media through audio, like, and how my focus was split, even though I was doing a task like stocking the shelves at work. Like, it is relatively mindless, but I still needed to pay attention a little bit to what I was doing, and then focus on the book. So I ended up listening to the book several times over just the little sections that we were into, and I was just realizing how much I rely on the entire audiobook as like a piece of work to put the story together, rather than how this time we're going deep into each chapter and we're like analyzing it differently. It's made me reappreciate things, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's cool.
Well, you haven't literally read a book in a while, right? Because you've just you've been hard on that audiobook train for years now.
Yeah, you're right. I literally have not physically read a book.
You can listen very passively, which is something that I do as well. I listen to a shit ton of podcasts constantly.
Me too.
And so it's really easy. And then I listen to them at 2.3 times speed. So it's even less, I miss more details than normal because it's like, I can context clues put together the fact that they use like some connecting words like the or whatever. I don't literally hear it though. Whereas when you're reading, that's the only thing that you're doing at the time. So it's much more active and you're catching way more that way.
But yeah, it's naturally more intimate probably just to be reading the words, and like that's the only thing you can do. You can't really multitask while you're reading. At least I can't. I can't enjoy a good song or do anything literally else. Like I saw people like in school, they used to walk and read.
That's insanity.
Yeah.
Those were weird kids.
Yeah, but they were always reading like Robert Jordan, like 900-page fantasy novels, or like hardcore ultra bloody gory sci-fi stuff. Like it was that's some level of multitasking or not caring that you're gonna run into a door that I think is kind of admirable almost, because I can't multitask like that. I can multitask doing a lot of different things, but if I'm trying to ingest some sort of media, I'm almost always 100% devoted to it. Like, I hate going to theaters because people talk. I hate watching most things with people because people talk. If I'm listening to podcasts while I'm working, it's okay because work is mindless. So it's not distracting me. But if I'm playing video games while I'm listening to podcasts, I'll often have to rewind. So like for somebody that's walking and reading, like that's just super dangerous. I feel like I would be completely engrossed and I would get hit by a car. Easy. I mean, I always saw them walking in school, so it wasn't anything crazy. It was just they were so used to the mindless herd of the
Yeah, but I would fall down the stairs at school. I would fall down that huge flight of stairs at the in front of the cafeteria. There's no way. I saw someone do that one time. It was fucking hilarious. I was walking to the cafeteria for some reason with Felix, and then all of a sudden we just hear.
Oh no!
And these books and papers just exploded at the bottom of the stairs because we were like coming up on the stairs. And then there was just some girl who maybe was dead. I don't know.
Oh no!
She was probably fine. Yeah, I just left her. Said, fuck it. I'm not getting involved with this. But that would be me if I was reading and walking in high school.
That would be. I wouldn't have saved the girl in freaking chapter 1, like Richard, right? Yeah, he. Obviously, there was something going on that made it a little different because he's kind of a weenie. But I don't know. Did you like this book? Did you relate to Richard? Do you think, or do you?
I like it so far. There was one theme that was relatively relatable whenever he's leaving home to go to this crazy old city. Mm-hmm. There's actually a line that I didn't take down in the notes, but I'm gonna find it right quick.
I felt like I related to him a lot. Like he kind of backed down a lot, and just was more ready to let somebody else kind of guide him. And I feel like I do that too often.
He's absolutely like, not like fully directionless. I mean, he went and got himself a job in London.
Yeah.
And
he did the move.
Seemed to be doing that job well. And we'll talk about it later whenever we get to his relationship with Jessica. But he seems like a fairly directionless man. He's just doing like the things in life that you're supposed to do. Get a good job, work decently at the job, have a living, good to go.
Yeah.
But there is a, let me see. Oh, here's the line that I was talking about. Whenever in the prologue, did you have the prologue in the audiobook or in your version of the paperback that you had?
Yeah.
Where he's drinking at the pub with his friends?
Yeah, I went to his going away party like 8 times, dude.
Okay.
Yeah, that was fun.
And I guess, well, I should just get to that whenever we get to that part. There's not a whole lot that I want to say about the prologue, because really all that happens is it just introduces him. He talks about how he's leaving for London, and then he has that interaction with that old lady.
Yeah, that's really just
to give
a big
little
obvious
bit of foreshadowing is all that it is. It's just the prologue is literally just like a quick little introduction and.
Do you have that little prophecy from the
a chance to do some foreshadowing?
Because that was just some pretty obvious foreshadowing. There wasn't much like hinting. It was just kind of straight up like.
Yeah, let's see.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's talking to the old lady. The old lady thinks that he's homeless because he's just like sat on the, sat in the gutter, in front of the pub.
Looking homeless.
Yeah. They talk a little bit. He says, I've got a job. That's why he's going to London, blah, blah, blah. And then she talks about how she was a dancer in London back in the day or what. And then...
so, hey, did that mean like a lady dancer? Like a night...
well, let's see.
Hooker?
If we assume that this story takes place in the 90s, which it gives us some hints later on that it does, then, and she's an old lady, let's say she's in her 80s, then she would have been, if she went into London when she was young and got married, like she says, then she was probably like in her mid-20s, early 20s, if she kind of ran away from home almost. So if she's in her 80s, it was 60 years ago, it was in the 90s, and it was like in the 30s that she went to London. So she could have been, I mean, the only dancers that happen back then are like show dancers, like on a stage, like an actual performance, or she may have been like in some sort of like gentleman's club or something like that.
Yeah.
I also don't know if there was any sort of potential, I doubt that there was, because it's England and England drinks a lot, but if during any sort of time frame that she may or may not have been in London, if there was any sort of like crackdown on drinking, then she may have been like in an underground club or something like that as well.
Yeah.
These are ultimately all things that don't matter, but
yeah. How did you like that it was in London? Like, was that weird for you? Like, I guess the reason I bring it up is because I know like nothing about it. I've never been. Literally, like when I think London, I think of like the scenes in like the Harry Potter movies. Like I literally said earlier when we were looking at the map, like, what was it? King's Cross, I know where that is. Yeah, and
right.
So, and that's just like a block away from literally where like we spent most of the book.
Yeah, I've also never been to London, so I don't have any personal experience with it. All I know about it is just stuff that I've taken from media. When I was younger, I was a bit of an Anglophile, where I was extremely interested in different aspects of the UK and everything like that. That was also whenever I was really into like medieval stuff, so I read a lot about it, and I would ingest any sort of story or anything that seemed related. So I guess I have a decent knowledge base that I can just reference, where nothing is unusual to me. But it's also a modern London, so it's just a big metropolitan city.
Yeah, there weren't any cell phones. That was one thing I noticed. And I mean, he was writing back in the 90s, like when Neil Gaiman was writing this book.
This book is evidently started in 91, I think I read. I meant to do more research on the backstory of writing this book and where that fits into his career, but I didn't give myself the time to.
Well, I actually read a little bit about that, and it's in this. So I went on Audible and I got the audiobook version of this, and the only one you can get is the author's preferred text, I think. So I also ordered the book, and in the front of the book, like the physical book, it has an introduction to this text, and it talks about how just like he started writing Neverwhere for BBC as a show. Like he started writing it to be a show, and then I think it was kind of like his silent revolt against the editors, because they kept editing out scenes that he thought were crucial, and it was just they were taking their creative license with his piece, and I don't think he liked the things that were getting cut, and I don't think he did it to get back at anyone either. I think he was just doing it because he says, like, at one point in this part that just whenever they'd cut something, he's like, we're cutting the scene from page 24, and he would always go, no problem, I'll just put it back in the novel. And then so finally he's like, we're cutting this scene, and if you say I'll put it back in the novel, I'll kill you. So he just, I don't know, he seemed like he was very active in creating it, and he was creating it for a show. He was trying to create something magical, but he couldn't really portray that in the exact way he wanted, so he wrote the book, and he said he finished it crazy quick. It said he started in January, and he finished in May. And that was like, he was done with the book. And as soon as he finished the book, he was like, I know I'm going to write another one because they're going to edit stuff out. So he's like already pre-planning this authored preferred text version after publishing the other one that we picked up at Half Price Books. So anyway, it's very funny. Like he's just, don't mess with his stuff. It's kind of like, he likes it the way it is. I guess that's everybody, but.
Well, back to the old woman in the prologue.
Oh yeah.
So she says, hold out your hand, and I'll tell you your fortune. He did as he was told. She put her old hands into his and held it tightly, and then she blinked a few times, like an owl who had swallowed a mouse that was beginning to disagree with it. You've got a long way to go, she said, puzzled. London, Richard told her. Not just London, the old woman paused. Not any London I know. It started to rain then, softly. I'm sorry, she said. It starts with doors. Doors? She nodded. The rain fell harder, pattering on the roofs and on the asphalt of the road. I'd watch out for doors if I were you. And so that's just the interaction with that. So it's just foreshadowing for, everything that's going to happen. Or at least just like setting up a theme of doors, which is pretty evident. Mm-hmm. At some point, I would like to count how many times the word door is in this novel, because it's probably up in the thousands. Yeah, and I don't want to say too much. Never mind, let's go. Well, yeah, we'll get there in time. Yeah. A page at a time, like a book is read. So after that, the old lady leaves. He goes back to he starts walking back towards the pub because his friends realize that he's not inside. I guess to start off, they're at a pub because he's going to be leaving tomorrow to go to London for a job. He lives in Scotland. That's given here. Somewhere in there, they outright say that he's in Scotland. Yeah, they were saying you can't get good scotch in London. And whenever he ends up getting back to whenever he ends up getting back to the pub. Yeah. And right before we get to that, there's a part where he's runs back after the old woman because it's starting to rain pretty heavily, and he gives her his umbrella. She says, "You've got a good heart. Sometimes that's enough to see you safe wherever you go, but mostly it's not." And that's just sort of like a bit more. That's the author telling us this is a good guy. Mm-hmm. So it's just character building for him. Yeah, especially so because as we learn about him, we learn he's he doesn't have a great sense of direction. So like his friends knew him, and already like this. That's what was the cool part about the umbrella, is that they had a map of the London Underground. Yeah, it does seem like the Underground is going to be a big deal. Yeah, because there's a map of the Underground in the first pages of the novel. Yeah, he's for sure going to get lost. He's got the map of it. He talks about it, or in his mind he's thinking about it in the first few pages of the first chapter about the Underground and all that. But in any case, so he gets back to the pub, and then like you were saying, they tell him you won't be able to get real scotch in London. He says, "I'm sure I will. They have everything in London." And then this was the part that I sort of related to, where he goes, and he downed the scotch, and after that someone brought him another, and then the evening blurred and broke up into fragments. Afterward he remembered only the feeling that he was about to leave somewhere small and rational, a place that made sense, for somewhere huge and old that didn't. Which just sounded familiar to me, because I did the same thing when I moved to Boston. Yeah. We grew up in a relatively small town. It's not like the smallest town in Texas by any stretch. There is a difference between small town Texas and where we grew up, for sure. For sure. But it was a smaller town, and even the city that we were next to is, not even, I think it might be in the top 5 size-wise cities in Texas, but there's nothing to do there. It's, feels like a small city. And then I moved to Boston, which, was not the first city in America, but really old. And I didn't literally live in Boston, but the city I lived in, Woburn, just outside of Boston, was incorporated in 1607. So it was older than most settlements, even across the country. It was older than anything that what would later become Americans were doing in Texas, which was the only place I had lived in before that. So it was completely different. And so just that line was kind of like, oh, I have too done that.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think your going away party was the only going away party I've ever been to.
Has anybody else moved away?
Probably not.
Not like terribly
serious,
far.
Yeah,
because
far.
Everybody went to college, and then all of y'all that went to college went directly to another city right after college. It's not like y'all then came back, spent a little bit of time there, and then moved off.
That's true.
You went to Houston.
Yeah.
A couple of people went to Austin or Dallas or whatever. But then even then, it's like, Houston is 3 hours away from Portland. Austin is 3.5 to 4 hours away from Portland. So yeah, I also, now that I'm thinking about that, I don't think I remember anybody else having a going away party either.
Yeah, yours was that one going away party that I remember. And then going to Boston, that was just seeing the history, like in the buildings. That was neat architecture, like even...
Yeah, whenever y'all came up and visited in January.
I don't know, it didn't really hit me until I probably came back to like Texas. I didn't, go anywhere, but
it was really interesting seeing buildings that were older than anything else I had ever seen in my life.
Right, that was where I was going. Yeah, exactly. That's just it makes you, I don't know, it's crazy. Yeah, it makes you step back. But anyway, I think that's everything in the prologue that really matters.
Yeah, that is literally just it. Then I guess we move into chapter 1.
Hey, so now that we know that he's Scottish, did you read a Scottish accent?
There was something weird. I'm sorry. I'm going to take a quick step back, back into the prologue. There was just something that like jumped out at me that I was just like, what is this? On page 2, at least page 2 in my edition, it may be different in your literal book. When it's giving a description of Richard Mayhew, there's a line that says, he had a rumpled, just woken up look to him, which made him look more attracted to the opposite sex than he would ever understand or believe, which I think is just completely neat. My note after that is just, what? Like, what is that?
Yeah, that was a self-serving note that
it definitely looks kind of weird. If you look at the picture on the back of my book, it's like, oh, he looks like he has a just woken up look.
Yeah,
he definitely just has like goofy, wild hair.
Who are you trying to be, Neil?
Yeah, and I was like, come on, man. Like,
yeah,
it's a little. What do they call that? Man, this is what they were accusing Ray of being a character. It's like a Betty Sue character is what they call it, where you just put everything that you want to be in like a cool character so that you can feel like you're that character and be cool as the author, Not that like this is literally that sort of situation, because he does seem to be a bit of a bumbling idiot, Richard Mayhew. Yeah. But just that one line, I was like, what is that? It was like stupid. Whatever. Yeah. It definitely seems like, and one of the reasons that I wanted to look more into like the background of writing this book and whatever other works he may or may not have done beforehand, I was just like, this just seems like a sort of like first time thing, or at least what I would think would be like a first time writer thing, just like kind of weird, needless lines, kind of not like a...
Well, and that's yours is like the edited version, which isn't even really edited. My chapter 4 ended at page 74, so like 5 pages tops, and that, I lose a page every chapter too because they blank out one of the sides, So we're reading the like same book.
It'll be interesting to see if we come across any little differences in the two versions of it, to see what it is that he thinks was important enough to be in there that might have just been like whatever.
Those left on the chopping floor, yeah. But yeah, what I was saying a second ago. So we know he's Scottish. Did you hear a Scottish accent in your head when you did his voice?
So I can, whenever people are talking that have these accents, I know that they're different, and there's, depending on what it is, I may even be able to immediately tell, like, oh, you're Irish, you're Scottish, you're English. But I definitely, if I'm doing a dumb impression or something like that, I can't make a difference in the impressions. It all just comes out to being like some just like garbage. There's I know the like the place that I constantly reference as with the accent. Can't remember what it is, but it's just like, oh, it's my favorite muffin. It is. I'm going to get on the tubes and I'm going to go down to London town. And, but, you know, it's just like the trashiest garbage, like most stereotypical English accent, which someone has told me is just whatever. I don't know where I got it from, but it is there are people that talk like that in a specific area of London. But that's just so underrepresentative of everything. But that's the stereotype that I've done, which is, happens with everything. Everyone English decides that Americans sound like John Wayne. So
so for me, I guess it's just something I do with my head. I don't even mean to. But like since I had already heard Neil Gaiman's voices for the characters, he had a slightly Scottish accent for Richard Mayhew, and he had a slightly different little accent for different people, and hearing his voice beforehand and then going in and reading the book, I basically was reading it in his voice. So I sort of read it with his accent, but he kind of taught it to me. I don't know if that happens to other people, but it happens to me a lot with different shows. Like if it's a show in another language, like anime or like just anything in another language, and they have the subtitles, like I can match voices really well. Like I can pick different characters out from different shows, and just so his voice, I don't know, it was just...
Yeah, I get what you're saying. It was definitely all narrated, and then what the individual characters' voices, I definitely did put an English accent on everything.
But not Scottish?
I don't know that it would have necessarily been Scottish, because I can't generate the difference myself. Yeah. It's difficult for me to generate the difference in my head as well, or at least knowingly. And then even like, it's just like it's not, the voice that I hear in my head isn't that stupid Geordie garbage that I was doing. It's just like a very generic English accent or whatever.
Yeah, I've just sort of stolen his, but it's funny stealing his accent and then going to read the book. Like I was talking to you earlier, and I was trying to ask like if you're going on vacation anytime soon, and I thought, and you said, are you going on holiday?
Yeah. I do that too. Whenever I'm going back through the Harry Potter series every several years or whatever, I'll after 7 books, all of a sudden like you pick up all the idioms and stuff like that, and I'll catch myself thinking in that tone, and I'll be like, what am I doing? I don't talk this way. Yeah. So I definitely do that as well. I think one time I was reading through the Harry Potter books and I was watching some English show at the same time. I was like, oh my god, I'm just inundated with this. But anyways, on to chapter 1. We start off with an unnamed girl who's running away from somebody. Talks about how she's super tired. Then she finds someplace safe, and so she sleeps, is what it says in mine.
Okay. Yeah, it's very mysterious. Like, it's weird because in the chapter he breaks it up into different sections of a single chapter.
They jump between characters.
Yeah, and they jump between the characters. And
sometimes between time, it seems like.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
So for the first paragraph in mine, starts, she had been running for 4 days now. And she's running. And then she finally finds a place. Described, after 4 days of flight, she had found a hiding place, a tiny stone burrow under the world where she would be safe, or so she prayed, and at last she slept. And then it jumps to the next set of characters that we find out about. Mr. Croup had hired Ross at the last floating market, which had been held in Westminster Abbey. So now we've got a new character, Mr. Croup. He's talking to somebody called Mr. Vandemar. Think of him, he told Mr. Vandemar, as a canary. And then they talk about this dude that they hired, Ross, who's just... They talk about him as a canary, just like old sacrifice. Mining canaries. Yeah. Canaries they're taking into mines so that they can... And what would happen with canaries is that if there's a gas leak or something like that, the canary will die immediately because it has such small lung capacity. And then they know, shit, we need to get out of here. Yeah. So he's just going to be like a signal and a sacrifice. They introduce something called the floating market, which appears to be some market that happens intermittently and at different locations. Because he says the last one where he hired Ross was held in Westminster Abbey. So even mentioning that it was in a location, we know that it jumps around, and it was the last one, so it also happens at different points in time. It's not just like a single place, like I'm going to go to Walmart or anything like that. Let's see. They hire Mr. Ross. Mr. Ross, they give him a quick description. There's nothing really interesting about him, but he does talk about how he likes to kill things and he's good at it, which is what presumably he was hired for. And then there's the weird paragraph where they're describing Mr. Coop and Vandemar, where he gives all these things about like, oh, Mr. Vandemar is 2.5 heads taller than Mr. Coop. Second, or what it says is there are 4 simple ways for the observant to tell Mr. Coop and Mr. Vandemar apart. It gives all this shit, and at the end it says, also, they look nothing at all alike.
The fourth way was they don't look anything alike.
It's like, okay, which is, I mean, is very kind of like dry English humor. Mm-hmm. I thought it was funny. I was like, okay, I guess at this point I'm having a hard time pinning down the tone of this book.
Yeah.
But, you know, we'll see how it continues to go.
I don't think that I necessarily was laughing or got the tone until my second playthrough. I wasn't as focused as I meant to be. And so one thing that it just, I think I remember what I was trying to say earlier. One thing that was hard to pinpoint is just I didn't know what I necessarily needed to focus on so early on because we don't really have any foundation. So I didn't really take too many notes in the beginning. One thing that did seem to really matter to me that I noticed on a second and third time through was his boring job was like Gary. Gary's important, and I don't know why. He's really, dude, it just like...
Yeah?
The way
you think he's going to matter later on?
Oh, yeah, man. I for sure think he matters. I think because I'll talk about it in chapter 3, how I think Gary was just faking it, you know. But, yeah, I think he matters. Rereading it, I didn't like... reading it the first time, I didn't like Gary at all. I thought he was kind of a dick. He was just like Gary, you know. And then the second and third time, it's like, no, Gary has a very good understanding of what's going on around here. Like, it's just... He felt a bit more sage than they let on, and he seemed like he was kind of on the inside, like he's one of these other people, just kind of, but he maybe is not, I don't want to say a spy, but you know, he's living among us, you know, because he definitely seemed like he had some weight to him, and I don't know why. He had a bunch of moments in the book, in the first chapter that it was just like, I think Gary matters, like he just.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really interesting because I think all the characters, all the normal people characters, are completely expendable and are literally here. In fact, in my notes, so we'll get to in just half a second. So they, it's just like a little bit of an introduction to these 3 characters: Croup, Vandemar, and Ross. Mm-hmm. They kill a rat that walks by. They make a joke about it. Vandemar starts eating the rat. So they're obviously weirdos. Mm-hmm. And then it jumps. 3 years in London had not changed Richard. We jump back to Richard. Mm-hmm. And then it just talks about how so now we're ahead 3 years from the prologue. Mm-hmm. Richard has been in London there. Talks about how he's now, what he thinks of the city now. He talks about how it's not what he thought, but it's just like another city. You know, it's how I imagine most of us imagine a city. It's busy. There's stuff. You know, it's just a large city.
It's always different too than you think it's going to be, and he seems very like he's kind of turned into a fake version of himself. Like as you sort of read on, it seems like he's just playing the role of Richard. To me, you know, it doesn't seem like he has any passion in what he's doing right now. He's just kind of like.
Well, to this point, I don't think we really know anything about Richard.
It's just, I mean. Yeah, I guess maybe I was just projecting on him.
Because it feels like, at least to me, and this could definitely be a difference in our editions of the books. So whenever you were saying that, and there appears to be some obvious difference where you think that Gary matters because Gary literally has like no point in my version.
I didn't think that either the first time through, and then the second time through, I was like, why is Gary getting these great one-liners? Like, why is Gary like?
Okay.
Yeah, I'll talk about it too when we go over some in chapter 3.
Talks about his job, talks about the history of London a little bit, goes on about how 2,000 years before, London had been a little Celtic village on the north side of the Thames, which the Romans had encountered and then settled in. And then it just talks about the growth of London, blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of focus on the past of London, which is kind of interesting because then on the map of the London Underground in this book, it has dates about when each crossing and each station was opened. And what it was opened as with its original name and different things like that. So there's some element of time that's important to be enough to be described in varying levels of detail.
Yeah, because we don't know what time it is, like what time we're in. But
as of it doesn't really tell us anything. Yeah, except for the fact that there are cars. Obviously the subway's there. The subway would have been there before cars, but there's cars we know so far. And then my next note is introduce Jessica, comma, plot device.
Yeah.
That seems to be her only purpose so far, is just something to move him along and literally take him to where the story starts. I don't think that she has any purpose. She seems kind of half-baked as a character.
This is some girl that Neil had a bad breakup with or something that, you know, like he just, I don't know, I'm projecting there too.
I feel like
she just, there's nothing likable about her, really.
I think that she's fine. I don't think that there's anything negative or positive about her. Well, I think that there is literally more positive than negative. Where she's obviously an affluent girl. She has a successful job. Mm-hmm. She comes from affluent parents.
Yeah.
She has goals in life. They mention in various points while we're still with her through the next couple of chapters that she donates to charity and things like that. She's a perfectly pleasant person and good citizen. Mm-hmm. And then she and it mentions it somewhere in here where she thinks that let's see, I think it's right here actually. Let's see. Okay, so Richard had been awed by Jessica, who was beautiful and often quite funny, and was certainly going somewhere. And Jessica saw in Richard an enormous amount of potential, which, properly harnessed by the right woman, would have made him the perfect matrimonial accessory. If only he were a little more focused, she would murmur to herself. So she sees something in him that is worth,
I guess she is
cultivating.
Funny.
So I think she's, fine or whatever.
Yeah, she was funny. I liked her. Now that you mention it, I liked her jokes.
I have a note here somewhere, and it might be a little bit later on during one of their interactions, but I remember taking down a note where Richard more or less is a man without direction, and Jessica's giving him direction.
Yeah.
Which is something that he latches onto and loves. There's one point where he's talking to Gary where he says that, she's still the light and love of my life, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, Gary. I mean, they're laying down the foundation for us to get to know him as, like, if the book wasn't about him, he would be the sidekick, like he needs to be led around. Like, it seems like he's part of Jessica's book. And then even on the back of your book, it says when he meets this girl, his life goes and changes on a completely different path or whatever. Mm-hmm. So, he seems like a force without direction, and they're basically just laying down that foundation, that groundwork for the force without direction that he's going, and then just wherever he is taken.
So, leading up to when Richard and the girl ultimately meet, he's at work. He's got a bunch going on. One of the things of which is that he's supposed to go to a dinner that night with Jessica and her boss. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, it's something that he's forgotten to make the reservation for. So he's running home to get home ahead of Jessica. The excerpt here, Jessica calls him while he's at work. Richard, said the speaker with Jessica's voice, "It's Jessica. You haven't forgotten, have you?" Forgotten? He tried to remember what he could have forgotten, so he's clearly forgotten about it.
Right, and even the way she asked it was like,
she knows.
Remember this thing. She wasn't even saying, like... She wasn't asking. Mm-hmm. She was telling him.
There's a point where he calls her Jess, and then she comes back, Jessica, Richard, not Jess. And
she's right about pet names or demeaning.
Yeah, he says that he's trying to figure out where to meet her. Should we meet at the restaurant? She pauses and says, after what happened last time, I don't think so. You could get lost in your own backyard, Richard.
Yeah.
And that's where my note comes up. Richard is a relatively directionless man, and Jessica gives him direction.
Yeah, I can see that.
After that, my next note is we jump to door. Mm-hmm. For me, it's page 16. She's sleeping in some abandoned space, is wakened by a sense of danger in her dream, or just the noise of the door opening. Mm-hmm. And that's when Ross attacks her. Mm. It ends up stabbing her. She is able to roll away so that she doesn't get got in the chest, but it gets her in the arm.
I don't know why I didn't consider the stabbing to be very important.
Because this is when the hard magic comes. And then it goes, until that moment, she had never thought she could do it. Never thought she would be brave enough or scared enough or desperate enough to dare. But she reached up one hand to his chest and she opened. So what we can assume happens is she opened a door in his chest.
Yeah.
Because he dies on top of her. She's killed Ross, the crony that was hired by Krupp.
The canary.
And then after that, we jump to Richard again.
Well, I think she also got wounded too, right? Did you already say that? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, she got stabbed. Okay.
We jump back to Richard. He's leaving the building. Okay, so jump to Richard finishing up work. Gary informs him how late it is. Richard rushes out of the office. He has to cancel his drinking plans with Gary because they were supposed to go drinks before he went, but he ended up staying so late at work. They get down to the main doors of the building, and they're automatic doors. He tries to go out of the doors, but they're locked because it's too late. Mm-hmm. So he's got to talk with Mr. Figgis, the security guard. He's got to sign out with it. Once he gets signed out, Mr. Figgis inspected their signatures and satisfied himself that they had no computers, potted palms, or carpets about their persons. Then he pressed a button under his desk and the door slid open. Doors, says Richard. Oh, gotcha. So he remembers the prophecy or the fortune that he gets from the old lady. So he's presumably been going these 3 years, just like that's been in his mind. He's like doors, whatever, just like even just like as a joke, referencing to himself. And then in my notes I have in all caps, call back. Jump back to door. She's running from Mr. Coop and Mr. Vandermeer. Nothing really happens. Jump to Richard. He's running home to be ready in time to meet Jessica. His apartment is generally messy. Jessica never wants to enter it. They're really selling some kind of convenient codependency between Jessica and Richard in this section, is what I wrote down, or typed down, rather. It seems like, and like we were talking about already previously, they've got this relationship that's sort of like codependent, but it's not like a nasty codependence. She sees something in him. She gives him purpose. So they seem to be good for each other.
Yeah, it just kind of doesn't make you feel like, I guess, Richard is being fully harnessed, even though that's the point of Jessica. She's trying to harness him, but I guess it just...
For a world that we assume has no magic until we get into the parts with Dor, it seems like that's about as best a life that he could have, because they do seem like they're genuinely in love, and they have the best interests of each other in mind. But they really are, it seems like the author here is really trying to push that idea on you that this is a more or less ideal relationship for what Richard could expect to have. Let's see.
I gotcha. Sometimes, I guess, coming back and maybe rereading it, it felt like he had written it with a bit of hindsight 2020, like almost like he knew it was coming to an end, because this was like the preface to the whole point of his book, like I think he kind of knew that. So I don't know why Jessica didn't. I guess that's why this didn't really stand out to me so much. They just didn't seem to be very good together. They just seemed like they were in lust, like the only things that he was able to say about her were the generic things. And then whenever she actually needed to stand up and defend like his honor or whatever, or like, or whenever they were gonna, like he was standing up for that girl, she just doesn't back him. It seems like she would expect him to back her.
Well, I think that she believes that she knows what's best. Yeah. Because Richard certainly doesn't. He doesn't assert himself in any way. She's always made the decisions for him. Or more or less, at least for what matters with their goals. Okay. But I think that more than anything, maybe, at least in my opinion, what you're seeing where it seems just like a weak relationship is just because she doesn't matter as a character.
I guess that's
This
true.
is all a vehicle to get him to the catalyst.
Probably.
So why would the author spend any time writing anything particularly good? I think that's the problem with this. Yeah. Or at least the problem that I have is that Jessica, plot device. Mm-hmm. I think that everybody up until this point is just nothing. They're nobody characters. Jessica's just there as a vehicle to get him to the catalyst. Gary is just a side character, adds some flavor to the fact that he was at work and to give him somebody to talk to later on when he goes back to work, which we'll get to. Yeah. So I think that at least all this background stuff was just kind of not necessarily poorly written, but poorly thought out. There's nothing given to any of these characters.
Yeah, it seems like maybe he has something in his mind figured out already that he hasn't necessarily explained all the way through. Like I think I've done that a couple times. Like I have something in my mind and I think he's definitely like,
all of the thought goes into whatever it is that's going to happen going forward. Mm-hmm. All the magic stuff, the actual story. Yeah. And then he's just like, well, I've got to start it somehow. Yeah. So I'll start it with these characters and then they're gone. It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. At least that's the way that I feel. So then, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, where are you on your notes?
So, jump the door, still running. She's starting to slow down, though.
Gotcha.
Jump back to Richard. Jessica's in a hurry to get them to the dinner with her boss. They have a short disagreement over pausing to give change to a homeless man. Richard tosses him a pound discreetly as they walk away. At some point, Jessica seems to realize how she's sounding towards Richard and implores Richard to know that she loves him. He does. Jump back to door. She has run into a dead end. Mr. Coop and Mr. Vandemar are closing in. And then this is where we get to that excerpt that you had. This is the last door I opened. She prays silently to the temple, to the arch, somewhere, anywhere, safe. And then she thought wildly, somebody. And then as she passes out, she tried to open a door.
I guess maybe that stood out to me because saying somebody opening a door,
that's definitely something that she seemingly hasn't done before, because it's like a last desperate thing to just to open a door to somebody. So that's how she gets to Richard, who we have now been inundated with the fact that he's like a thoughtlessly or self-thoughtlessly good person who's just doing stuff because he has this innate sense of good about him. And that's really the only character trait that we know about him so far.
Yeah, he, I don't even know if he has the good about him. He just seems to be like almost there.
He's now done twice things that he knows to be good. He's given the umbrella to the old woman in the prologue.
Yeah, you're right.
He wanted to stop to give money to the homeless man that him and Jessica were walking by, but Jessica was like, we got no time for you to stop and find money. But as they're walking away, he finds one and tosses it back.
Yeah, he's got like a...
He has an innate goodness about him. Mm-hmm. He's just sort of like a bumbling idiot that doesn't have any direction.
Yeah. And I guess this is the direction and the guiding that of Richard to the plot of the book.
Yeah. What I think is seemingly going to happen is that this directionless man that has this innate sense of goodness about him is going to be given a purpose, and that's going to potentially be his character development. Is that now he's going to, grow into somebody with purpose and direction and something like that. Pretty classical character arc.
I think just knowing that this is like has some British humor style to it. But no, I got it sort of like a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy sort of vibe. How I even feel like that's probably why I thought Gary was important, because I feel like there has to be somebody from the other side that they've given us a window to. We know that there's a girl on this like other side. I feel like, I don't know, it's very Douglas Adams, very not super cool like main character with a bunch of cool people around him.
That's an extremely popular thing across most media. The majority of video game characters are nobody characters that you can insert yourself into.
Yeah.
A lot of stories go that way. I mean, really, if you think about it, Harry Potter is kind of a nothing character for several books.
Sure, he's the underdog.
The only time that he starts being something that you can't immediately relate to because he's nobody is the Order of the Phoenix, whenever he starts having his own like actual feelings about things and getting upset about shit. Mm-hmm. Which is because he's starting to go through like hard puberty. He's at that age or whatever. But still, like up until that point, he's kind of just like, I'm the protagonist and I'm good, whatever. Mm-hmm. So that happens a lot where the side characters are way more fleshed out than the main characters, because the main character... And it's a strategy to make it a main character that you can just insert yourself into and therefore appreciate the story more.
Yeah, that's probably then exactly what he was kind of trying to get to happen then. Just to have a very blanket guy that you can relate to, and then you become him and you kind of play through this book as Richard.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely an element of that so far, because we don't know anything about him except that he's innately good, and he's just kind of like a wishy-washy, not even wishy-washy, that's not the right word, but he's just kind of like a whatever dude. But so then the girl opens the door. We jump back to Richard. They're walking still. Jessica is prepping Richard for interacting with Mr. Stockton, her boss. She's prepping him like you would prep to meet the queen, giving these different things.
It's just super, almost demeaning, like he can't handle meeting another grown-up, like, because this grown-up is so far above his class, like his status, that and I think that's definite,
because there is a point where Gary says, Mr. Stockton, the Stockton of Stocktons. Yeah. Like, so he's obviously like a famous person that's a big deal. And then later on in another chapter, it talks about how he's all over the newspapers all the time too. But then this Mr. Stockton guy is evidently very full of himself, because the way that she's saying to interact with him is like laugh when he makes a joke, because it's her boss and she needs, like, even if she doesn't necessarily believe it, she needs to play this part to continue to have a successful career.
Yeah, it's part of her job now.
But all that aside, a door opens from a building ahead of them. Door falls out. By now we know her name is Door. The book has referenced her as Door. Richard stops to see if she is all right. Jessica wants to continue to the restaurant. Richard points out that Door is hurt. Jessica relents and says to call 999. Door says no hospitals. She's afraid Mr. Krupp and Mr. Vandemar will find her there. Richard picks her up and walks away. he just sort of does it. He doesn't know why he's necessarily doing it. Jessica declares that they will be over if he does this. He does it.
That was weird for me, because up until this point, he'd never made the first decision he made was go to London.
I think the idea is
like the next big one.
A big decision. But I think that he can't help but do something good
because she opened the door to him, and I get.
Yeah, I don't know if that's some sort of like it could be like a thing where it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy where because it happens, it has to happen, or the inverse of that where the door opened up to Richard because he was going to do it, and I think that's what it's been telling us over and over again is that he's going to do the right thing. Whether or not he even thinks about it, because he runs to give his umbrella to the old lady in the pouring rain. He can't stop from giving the change to the homeless person.
Yeah.
And now he can't stop from helping this girl. And it's not even just like, I'm going to call the police or the hospital and they're going to come. I'm going to do her request, which is no hospitals.
That was why. It was like, now is he doing good, or is he just... Now it feels like he's being guided by some sort of
I think that, and it
magic.
could be the self-fulfilling prophecy thing where, it forces itself to happen. But I think, at least so far, my interpretation is that he's so innately good, he's always going to do what is the right decision, whether he knows it or not. So that's why the door opened up to him.
I guess.
He was like the beacon for the door rather than the door opening it up makes him the beacon, in my opinion.
Yeah. I don't know why. I guess in my head it feels like the right decision was to you should have
our conventional right decision, but the right decision
for this
ultimately is for him to take her somewhere or whatever
to help, to save her.
And I think that's probably it ends up being the right decision just because she says no, I don't want to go to the hospital, and for some unknown reason he believes her.
He's like, oh, okay. That's off.
But so then that's the end of so they ultimately get to the apartment. He leaves her in his bed. She convinces him not to call a doctor to help with the wound, and then he goes and sits on the couch and falls asleep. So that's the end of chapter 1. Yeah. So chapter 1 is we get introduced to a bunch of characters that I don't think are going to matter. Maybe they do come back. I mean, they do literally come back here in the next couple of chapters, but once the adventure starts, I don't think they're going to matter anymore. Maybe at the end of everything, he comes back to the normal society or something like that, and we see them just as like a reference, but I don't think they're going to be a part of anything pivotal.
Yeah.
So then we start chapter 2. Richard has a dream about fighting some huge boar. Is that the same way that yours starts?
Yes, exactly. Okay.
I'm sure it has some sort of foreshadowing, but who knows what it is. He dies.
He gets gored by the boar, right?
Yeah, he does. He misses with his spear throw, or maybe he doesn't even miss. It just says, but it's already too late. He gets gored, and he's laying there bleeding. Assumably he dies in the dream or whatever. He gets waked up by Door.
By girl.
As the girl, because now it's from his perspective.
I gotcha.
But we as the reader know she's Door because she's been referenced as Door in the previous chapter. So in my notes, I have her as Door, sorry.
No.
Door wakes him. There's some scene setting about how he's at the apartment. You're awake, said Richard. Whose barony is this? Asked the girl. Whose fiefdom? Sorry? She looked around her suspiciously. Where am I? Newton Mansions, Little Compton Street. He stopped. She had opened the curtains, blinking at the cold daylight. The girl stared out at the rather ordinary view from Richard's window, astonished, peering wide-eyed at the cars and buses and the tiny sprawl of shops. A bakery, a drugstore, and a liquor store below them. I'm in London above, she said in a small voice. So now we know that there's another world.
Oh.
Another world that is, for what we can assume, completely separate of it. Something, and maybe even something that she's never been to before, because she's almost in awe that she's in London above.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like she's ever been here before. I don't know how she got to where she is, obviously, but yeah, but it doesn't even mean anything to Richard. He's like, London above. Like, I won't even register
he's
that.
He's still so
half,
bewildered that he just doesn't know,
And barony, it's like, I don't even know if I could define barony. Is that like who runs this show? Who's the captain?
A barony would be like, and then she like reiterates whose fiefdom. It's just like
is that the same thing?
Like tracts of land. It's not like literally the same thing, I don't think, but for our purposes here, more or less, it's just like, so Like a fiefdom is a section of land that you would get as a knight or a lord under a king of a country or what,
Okay.
So there's some sort of ancient society in the place that she comes from. Something that hasn't been observed, like just like a hierarchy that hasn't been observed in a really long time in the modern world.
Yeah. One thing that I just literally realized, like, as you were saying it, you've been saying fiefdom, Fiefdom. It sounds like thiefdom, like, to me in the audiobook, just like a city of thieves or something, like a thiefdom. I don't know. I've never heard fiefdom before, so that or read it, so that word didn't come to me. I didn't know that one. So only until I just read it right then, I guess I probably should have known that word. But it's just it sounded like a different thing. So I never really. I was like, man, that would throw me off hearing. Like, whose barony is this? Like, I thought she said thiefdom, like they're, like, she was part of some thieving community, like, And
a barony would be like the whatever area of land or whatever that is under control of a baron.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense.
So yeah, she's obviously, her society observes this, archaic hierarchy, which further plays into all the time stuff that they talk about, where they give all this history of London in the beginning of the first chapter, and then with all the the notes and the map that's given at the beginning of the book. My notes here say, by now we know there's magic in this world with her door opening, and now we definitively know there's some other world with an other society that Door is from.
Yeah, it was just kind of assumed before because we were cutting from so many things and they sounded so different, but now we have definitive, like, there are two worlds.
Yeah,
and this one is different.
They're starting to give us revelations that are, definitive. Let's see. Then we jump ahead a bit. They go to clean and stitch up her arm wound, which is smaller than it was last night, so it did just need some time to heal. She's got some sort of healing property about her, and it's probably just could be like the magic of her world or whatever. The doorbell rings. Richard tells Door to stay in the bathroom. He thinks it's Jessica. It's Mr. Croup and Mr. Vandemar. In his head, Richard likens them to a fox and a wolf, respectively. They're asking about Door. They pretend to be her brothers, stating she is crazy and has gone running. They have a picture. It's her. Richard lies, says he's not seen her. Vandemar enters the apartment, sniffing around. He ends up going into the bathroom where nobody is. At this point, Richard's like, hey, this is my apartment. You can't just go rooting around. Get out of here. There's a section where, or a small excerpt where Vandemar suddenly it's like he heard him for the first time when he starts yelling at him, turns around, and then Richard realizes he's never been more afraid of any man in his life. And then that's when Mr. Croup jumps in and calms down Vandemar. It's like, hey, blah, 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 trying to continue to keep up the act because obviously Vandemar was about to snap, and they leave.
So one thing that was a little different to me in the audio version was they were interrogating him a little bit when they showed up, Coop and Vandemar.
They were definitely asking a bunch of questions.
Croup, yeah, and it's funny because you hear the way Neil Gaiman enunciates, and it really stood out, like how he's written it for, like, have you seen this girl? They're talking about these photocopied signs of just these plain signs, and it's just like it takes up a huge part of the page. Have you seen this girl? Like, answers to the name of Doreen, bites and kicks, run away. Tell us if you saw her. Want her back. Rewards paid. It's just like bad grammar. It's just
that seems to be like signs that are like old timey almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the way that they depict like wanted signs, like in the Old West or something like that. Just like
exactly
the information that you need doesn't have to be grammatically correct. And
as you say that too, it's even formatted that way because like it's got it. Have you seen this girl? Which would be where the wanted would be. It's got a little paragraph explaining that it's got a photocopied gray photograph of Door,
right,
and then. At the bottom, it's got her stats.
It's exactly almost like they're trying to sell this image of them being modern men looking for somebody in their family, but because they're from some other society, they don't fully know how all the idiosyncrasies of this world. They're a little bit off because they've got this this poster that is reminiscent of a long time ago.
I think it's right around here too, where Richard notes what Croup and Vandemar are wearing. He talks about how they seem to have suits that have been tailored by a guy
somebody who had never seen a modern suit but had it described to him.
Exactly. I thought that was a really cool way to describe like just what they were wearing because I don't know, in my mind I can paint like the perfect picture of what I think that would be. But if you try to describe, I don't know.
Right.
It was really cool.
So you definitely know that they're
from an older time, but
I don't even know that they're necessarily from an older time. They're from a place outside of time, at least in our reckoning.
I can.
Because they're from this other society that, and maybe at some point, societies split off in the same way that the Harry Potter universe. We're gonna reference Harry Potter a lot because that's like the only like English thing that we ever talk about, where they kind of diverge because they decided to go secret, you know, and so the references of time are a little bit different. Where the wizards all dress kind of oldie. And they, you know, things are a little more old-fashioned aesthetic-wise in the wizarding world.
Yeah.
Whereas time has obviously progressed for the Muggles.
They didn't seem to care too much in Harry Potter. They just wore whatever.
Right. But maybe in this book that's not the case. Maybe it's not like a split and a divide. Maybe they have always been separate. We don't know yet.
The way she says London above makes you think like there's a...
They're definitely aware of the regular world.
It makes me think of like the sewer people in Futurama, like the old...
Right.
Old New York or whatever.
Yeah, they're definitely aware of the other world. There was either a split at some point or a discovery at some point.
Ooh. Hopefully discovery. That would be more fun.
So then, after they leave the apartment, there's a short scene outside the apartment.
Good, I'm glad you're talking about that.
Croup is thinking about whether he had cut the right cord on the Richard's phone. And then this is where we get our first explicit time period estimate, the 20th century. Because it talks about 20th century telecommunications technology not being his strong point. And then Mr. Croup turned to Mr. Vandemar. Do you believe him? They turned back down the stairs. Do I hell? Said Mr. Vandemar. I could smell her. So
Vandemar is the one he described as a wolf, too.
Yes.
So he might be a wolf.
There is an interesting allusion later on that I will mention.
Yeah.
In reference to that.
Yeah.
Jump back to Richard in the apartment. Phone rings. He tries to answer, but the cord to the receiver is cut. So Croup did not cut the right cord. Or maybe he did.
No, he did cut the right cord because he has to switch phones later.
What I would assume he meant to cut was the line. So that he couldn't receive calls. Because if I'm going to cut someone's phone cable, why am I just cutting the receiver cord? But that's also just, I don't know what his goals are.
No, that's the smarter way to do it. I didn't even consider that because you're right. I kind of forgot how old, like...
Because you either cut the phone line or you cut the receiver cable.
And that it sounded like he just cut the receiver cable and he didn't realize...
Yeah, that's because the phone call comes through and gets to his machine. But we don't know what Croup's goal is there specifically. So maybe he did mean to cut the receiver so he couldn't... So the calls could still come through and potentially go out, but he just couldn't actually use the phone. Or he meant to deaden calls, like I would assume anybody who means to cut a cable is meaning to do.
That was my first assumption, but as you talk about it more, I think you might be onto something.
Jessica leaves a message about breaking up. Oh. That's really all it is.
Which she even says, I wish you were on the line so I could say it to your face. It's like, yo, Jessica, that's still not to his face. It's let me read it right quick. She says, like, I wish you were on the line because it's the last conversation we're ever going to have, and I wish I could have it to your face.
Answering machine on the table next to the phone. Her voice said, Richard, this is Jessica. I'm sorry you're not there because this would have been our last conversation. And I did so want to tell you this to your face. I think it's a separate thought. Where she's saying that she wants to have this conversation with him rather than just leaving a message. And on top of that, I don't even want to do this over the phone. I want to tell you this to your face.
But does she? Because she just has the easy out. Like even
I don't think that the easy out is her style. She's a direct and goal-driven style.
I mean, even earlier, like when she's like, whenever Richard leaves her on the street for this other like stabbed woman, you know, to help her. When he leaves her there, she thinks jokingly to herself, like, what can I do to make my life, like, what can I do to help my image? Because this is a big deal for, like, he was going to meet my fiance. And now I'm going to say he's dead. How easy would it be to say he's dead? And she even... That
was not in my book.
Oh, really? Because that happens in this one.
In my book, she says, if you don't come back here right now, this engagement is over. She's furious. And then she's crying. And that's the last we hear about her.
Okay. See, in mine, at the end, like, he leaves. And then Jessica's there for a little while. And then she cusses really loudly by herself. She's like, shit. And she throws her... I think she actually did have a cell phone. Because I think she threw her phone in her purse and everything goes scattered. Maybe this was added back in and he didn't catch that. But... her things go scattered because she was pissed. She yells shit and throws it down. And she thinks jokingly to herself, like, how could she come up with a way for this to be like acceptable? Could she joke that he died? Like, and how easy would it be for her to say that he died? Because she straight up says that, and then like laughs to herself about it.
I think that's just what do you call it? The way that you joke about something when something tragic has happened to you. That's just like what's the word?
You got a lot of faith in Jessica, Will.
Well, because at least in my edition, he puts a lot of effort into making sure you know that they believe that they love each other.
Yeah, you're right. More
than once he mentions it. So I think, and because the way that everything else plays out with them, like we had already talked about, they're nothing characters. I don't think that the only thing that we know about Jessica and Richard is that she's goal driven. He's not necessarily, but he's not lazy, so to speak. But he can latch on to her giving him direction. And I think at least twice they explicitly say that they know that they are in love with each other fully.
That to me felt like one of those things, though, like she had to say it because, like, when you're in love, you know you're in love. Like, you don't have to say it necessarily. It just felt like one of those things that they were.
But she never says to herself, I love him.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like, she has to tell it to him to make it real.
She reminds him because the one time that she reminds him saying it is because she realizes that she sounds a little bitchy right then. And I think that happens a lot in any conversation where you're like, you get, involved in what you're saying and then you're like, okay, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. I'm doing this. You know that actually.
Definitely.
But in any case, maybe I have more faith in Jessica than I should at this point.
Apparently, I had a nasty line about her. You told a nasty little lie.
I think that was her coping. How easy would it be for me to just joke that he died or something? I think that's just like, because obviously you don't then just go to a dinner and be like, I'm sorry, Richard couldn't make it. He died. Like, he died. That makes absolutely no sense. That would never be viable by anybody. So she's just making like a dry coping joke to herself because she's like, what the fuck just happened, Mm-hmm. But in any case, gets a breakup message. Dora's making tea for them. Richard's trying to ask her questions about things, but Dora's not forthcoming.
Richard's still a little befuddled too because he doesn't know how she basically became invisible or hid in his bathroom that has no hiding spots,
Yeah.
And she's hiding from smell, like she's hiding from a dog. You can't hide from those.
Yeah, there was definitely like a weird. Because they go into the bathroom, she's not there.
Well, and he followed his nose, so he's got something. Yeah, but different. Richard has different sense.
Yeah, there's definitely something weird happening. Yeah. But Richard visually did not see her anywhere, and then whenever they leave, they go to the door. All of a sudden, Dora's there making tea. Mm-hmm. So there's already something weird going on that even just he can see doesn't make any sense because this describes his apartment as small, and there wouldn't have been anywhere to hide.
I keep forgetting too. I know we've said doors 100 times, but like she could have just maybe opened a door, gone somewhere else. Yeah,
I think that's the assumption is that she just went to like a door that took her someplace and then she came back.
And think about your scent still being there when you were gone, because you leave a scent. You don't just carry it always with you. You leave it behind.
Right.
And I didn't think about that.
But Richard's asking questions. Dora's not forthcoming. No, Richard. Honestly, you don't want to know. It wouldn't do you any good. You've done more than you should have already. And this is something that continues to happen with another character that we see later on. Nobody is going to answer any of Richard's questions. They keep telling him, no, you don't want to know anything. They're trying to figure out what to do next. Richard's like, can we call anybody?
Yeah, no, how do we talk to your friends and family, basically?
Dora comes up with an idea. What Dora does is she lures a pigeon from the window. Richard holds it while Dora writes a letter to attach to it. He notices that he can't tell what color her eyes are. I don't know if that's going to matter or not. I just thought it mattered. Describes them as fire opals. Dora attaches the letter with a rubber band Richard uses for his bills. Dora talks to the pigeon, tells it to look for the Marquis de Carabas. They wait.
Yeah, and the pigeon cooed back at her and was like,
yeah, they're like talking.
Yeah, they and I think she even, she does.
She even makes a weird pigeon sound at some point.
Yeah. You're looking for Marquis de Carabas.
And then Richard's like, for a second, it sounded like you were talking to it, that it understood you. And then she goes, yeah, imagine that. Like, she's pretty tongue-in-cheek, like he doesn't know anything. That? She's very aware that he has no idea what magic is or anything like that. And she's just like, okay, well, I'm just going to roll with it. I don't want to tell him too much. During the conversations that they have while they're waiting, there's an allusion to Croup and Vandemar not being human.
Right.
Because Richard says, what about those two men? And she goes, men?
Were they
I guess you could describe them as men. 2 arms, 2 legs, heads.
Yeah.
Something kind of goofy. She's definitely kind of like an almost sort of like a little aloof. She's kind of like just kind of goofy and not regular, which is, something that people use for weird characters from other worlds all the time. Just make them seem kind of weird and goofy, and then that'll be enough description to make you know that she's not from here.
Yeah. Jane Austen. Why do I know her? Is she the...
Jane Austen wrote
gorilla?
Pride and Prejudice.
Oh.
That's the one that people always reference anyways. Right. And then other things.
So,
wrote the book that she picks up and starts reading.
I wonder why he chose her.
I was going to look it up and see if it has any significance. Maybe I'll look it up later, and then I'll be on the lookout for when it comes up later on, if it does. Because it could also just be his favorite Jane Austen book. Who knows?
Yeah, you could just be into Jane Austen. He could have been reading Jane Austen at the time. Who knows what made him pick that.
So then a rat shows up. It has a message attached to it with the same rubber band that the pigeon was sent off with. It's a message from the Marquis de Carabas.
Richard's not super cool with this rat too, by the way. He freaks out. Yeah, he freaks out, and she freaks out back at him. It's like, you better not have hurt my boy, my little rat.
We jump ahead. Richard has gone to Oxford Street. I took an excerpt from here. You have to follow the directions written on here. Try not to let anyone follow you. Then she sighed and said, I really shouldn't involve you this much. Again, reiterating that something's happening or something could happen because he's getting involved in the world. They don't want him to know too much. Mm-hmm. The instructions lead to Orme Passage, however you want to say it, which Richard doesn't remember. My note here says it's some grim old place shit. Once you know about it, you can find it.
Yeah, exactly.
Richard finds the Marquis. He's weird. Richard tells the Marquis that Dora wants him to transport her to the floating market. The Marquis asks about compensation. Richard mentions that Dora says she will owe him a really big favor. Marquis says, let's go.
Yeah, he lights up at the really big favor part. And he's like, really big favor? Are you sure she said it exactly like that? And then he's like, yeah, I mean, she said she'd owe you one. And that made it a big deal. And then immediately after, you kind of see why, because he goes and he cashes in on a 20-year-old favor for this one favor. So it either shows the significance of Dor, or that she's got...
It seems that the Marquis just works off of favors. Yeah. Or maybe even that society works off of favors.
Right, yeah.
So they go down the manhole. Richard's trying to ask questions. Carabas stops him. They walk down the tunnel for a while. Eventually they climb a ladder. Partway up the ladder, they hit daylight, and Richard looks down to find that he's 1,000 feet above London. He freezes, but manages to continue and get up to the roof where Carabas is waiting. This is where they run into Old Bailey, some weird guy who's covered in ropes and feathers. Carabas talks to him. Now, you've owed me a favor for 20 years, Old Bailey, a big favor, and I'm calling it in. Carabas hands him a silver box. Do you know what this is? I wish I didn't. You'll keep it and safe for me. I don't want it. You don't have any choice. So, yeah, that's where we start talking about favors again with Carabas. So that's how he at least conducts business.
So in the preface to this book, we had that about this book section. He has a little end thing, like a little ending sentence that I bet Dick Carapace knows about some secret thing. I don't know. The last little paragraph was like, I don't write sequels. Still, the world of Neverwhere is one that I hope one day I'll return to. In a book called The Lost Rivers of London. Mm-hmm. I read about a brass bed found one day in a sewer. To this day, nobody knows where it came from or how it got there. I bet Dick Carapace knows.
Dick Carapace is definitely seems like he's just kind of like that character that's the through line of a lot of stuff, and he's like the guide. He's the one who's got his hands in everything.
Yeah,
he's
they make him seem like a Gandalf or like a Dumbledore, like the.
He comes along whenever the plot needs to move along.
Exactly.
He's that vehicle. DM. He's that constant vehicle.
Yeah.
It seems that way, anyways. He has all the trappings of those characters whenever you get introduced to them. Mm-hmm. So then, after he cashes in his favor with Old Bailey, they enter a tower and proceed down. Richard tries to ask about Old Bailey. Who was that man? Askers heard.
Yeah, what just happened?
Peering through the dim light, their footsteps echoed and reverberated down the metal stairs. The Marquis de Carabas snorted. You haven't heard a word I've said, have you? You're in trouble already. Everything you do, everything you say, everything you hear just makes it worse. You had better pray you haven't stepped too far in. And then I have a note. There is a reason neither Dora nor Carabas are giving any answers. They exit through a door that leads them into the broom closet of his apartment building. An old calendar from 1979 gives us another explicit estimate of the time period. Maybe this takes place in the late 80s, early 90s. Because they don't seem to, aside from what you're remembering from that excerpt about Jessica that I didn't have, it doesn't seem like anybody has cell phones. But this calendar from 1979 is described as an old calendar that's not going to be any use to anybody anymore. So it takes place sometime after that, late 80s, early 90s. They enter the apartment, Dor is there. Carabas goes to Wendy and calls her my lady. Carabas and Dor talk about a couple of things that we've already known about, and then they get ready to leave.
Clarifies
the favor.
The favor thing, and that's very particular. I don't know if words carry weight, like a binding weight, or
that
if it's
seems
just
to
like
be just the way that
held
he
to your word.
The way
like
that he says it, it just seems to be like the kind of like almost seedy way that he goes about business and talks. He's like,
oh, okay.
I've heard that the words favor, big, and really were used in the same sentence.
Exactly. Okay.
And so it
like
just seems like he's just kind of like a seedy dude. Like this is what I heard.
Like the genie that'll give you what you want, but not like a 70 virgins, but they're all like men or like nerds, you know?
Right.
Gotcha. Yeah. So he's like the double crossing.
Richard talks. You're leaving? She nodded. I'll be safe now, more or less, I hope, for a little while. Where are you going now? She smiled gently and shook her head. I'm out of your life, and you've been wonderful. She went up on tiptoes then and kissed him on the cheek, as friends kiss friends. If I ever need to get in touch with you, you don't, ever. And then she paused. Look, I'm sorry, okay? And then they disappeared.
Dude, have you ever been kissed by a friend like that?
Yeah.
I've never been kissed goodbye by a friend like that. As friends kiss
It's a less
friends.
American thing, but it happens on occasion.
Yeah, I mean, I've been kissed for
It's a very European thing.
Hello. I guess when I went to Cuba, I got a bunch of hello goodbye kisses, but it didn't feel... That felt like a smoochie. Maybe it was just a European thing. Like the
It's very
the
European
kiss.
and it's very Latin.
Okay.
Mexicans do it all the time.
Yeah.
I can say that because I'm half
that.
Mexican.
Okay. Yeah, I mean... Seems like it's maybe they got that from Spain.
Well, I think it's just, I mean, who knows when it started, but I mean, it happens all across Europe like that, to my knowledge.
Cool. So we're on chapter 3.
Yeah, and this
we
will
just
be
finished 2.
I have less notes in chapter 3 than I have for chapter 2. Everything interesting happens in chapter 2. Mm-hmm. Chapter 3 is almost just exposition-y. Richard spends Sunday doing nothing. He tries to phone Jessica, but he doesn't reach her. There's a short monologue about her parents not approving of him, which leads to a short description about how his parents are dead. Jump ahead to Monday. Richard's alarm doesn't go off Monday. Excuse me. Richard's alarm doesn't go off Monday. He runs to the street where no cab will stop for him. He goes to the subway where his change will not buy him a ticket. And then whenever he gives up and jumps the turnstile, he can't get past all the other commuters that don't seem to notice him to get on the train. His jacket gets caught in the train as he's trying to force his way in, and he has to rip himself free. He ends up walking to work. He arrives at work, and everybody seems to ignore him. His desk is emptied. Nobody is acting like they know who he is.
One thing about that was interesting, it's not that they just were acting like they didn't know who he was. Like, they just didn't know he was there at all.
And it gets progressively worse as time goes on.
Well...
Because anybody that he immediately addresses at work responds to him.
Right, yeah.
But just in passing, they're just like, oh, it's just a guy. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, unless he, like, forces them to respond or act like even the cab.
Because he talks to Sylvia. He's like, hey, Sylvia, what is going on?
Right.
And she's like, I'm sorry, who are you?
Yeah. Even the cab driver, though, like, until he stood out in front of the second one, it swerved out of the way. The first one, he just waved down. And then the second one, he just got super aggressive. I guess that's how you do it.
He tried to, like, stand out. And, and then it just swerves around him.
Yeah.
So he's definitely, like, not noticeable, but he's not yet invisible.
But, yeah, it's something, like, I guess it almost feels like, yeah, like in the back of everyone's mind, they kind of notice that he's there only if they force it.
He just blends in.
He blends in. He's more, he's
not worth noticing.
And the people that do notice are the only ones, or that can barely pull anything back, is like Jessica. People
that he's got stronger ties to.
Yeah.
He's more prominent in their minds. So it's like he's being pushed back to people, to the back of people's minds, like you said.
Yeah, that's...
nobody notices. Talks to him about it. So you said you had something about Gary here.
Here's my Gary feature. So when we talk about Gary in this section, Richard goes and he like kind of catches him. He said, obviously writing to someone that wasn't his girlfriend. Like, I think Gary's acting. I think he's faking. I think Gary is like part of this other world, and he's like the.
Well, they work at
Ford.
They work in securities, so they work like for like accounts and stuff like that for people. So I think it's an open office that clients can go to. And I think what happens as he's progressively becoming less and less memorable and nobody remembers who he is, I think when he goes and he sits down in front of Gary and he tries to get his attention, he's like, hey, talk to me, blah, blah, blah. Gary looks up and so then he puts on his client face. He's like, oh, hi, I'm Gary something something. How can I help you? Like he's beginning a client interaction.
Yeah. When I read it back, he doesn't say anything until Richard is like, Gary, what's going on? Is this a joke or something? Then Gary realizes. But I liked that he seemed to be writing something that was both, it seemed that he wrote that Gary was doing something
He's doing something really weird. What does it say? He's writing an email to somebody that is sexually explicit and addressed to someone who was not Gary's girlfriend. So it's just Gary going about his day at work.
Where did I get the word obvious? I wrote down obvious. Maybe I just thought it was obvious.
Yeah, so Gary's just going about his illicit activities at work.
Yeah.
And doesn't notice that Richard's there because Richard is not noticeable.
That was my one reason why I thought Gary was important. One of those.
I wonder what you were thinking at the time. But yeah, so I don't think that there's anything important about Gary because he doesn't do anything.
I mean, he's the constant at work. He's the only one. He's the one that has the time. He's the one.
He's the only character that they've told us about at work, aside from Sylvia, who's just an assistant for somebody else.
Right.
Has 2 lines. Gary's the only person that they've talked about at work because they need to give him some connection at work.
He's the only one Richard has. Yeah.
It's his friend at work.
It just. Oh, I think too. When he's going to meet the Marquis de Carabas, like he even notes like, oh, that's that Indian joint that Gary likes, you know? Like he notes something that's like, oh, that's Gary's favorite place. Like that was right next to the door.
I think Gary's his only friend.
Oh, maybe that's it. Maybe that's why it's so important, because I could just feel the loneliness. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It felt like he just put too much extra energy into Gary. It felt like that maybe I just wanted him to be important, but I think he's gonna come back up. Whether it's like you say at the end, he just comes back up as like a integrate back into regular people life, or if he's actually like I think or hope he's like a spy, like he's from the other side.
Yeah,
that would be my ideal. But anyway, that's the only little thing is just that Gary felt like very. I don't know, very likable, very human. He had a lot of
It's his only friend, and I think in Gary, at least at the beginning, when I first read through, he's also like, what is up with Jessica? Why is Jessica so controlling? And then, so I was like, yeah, why is Jessica so controlling? And then the more I read about it, I was like, okay, I mean, this is the relationship that works for them, and they don't seem to be, there's nothing toxic about the relationship, in my opinion. So then we jump ahead, Richard goes to Jessica's office. The receptionist ignores him. He sees Jessica down the hall and goes to her. He gushes about how everything has been crazy, how the morning has been crazy, how he's sorry about Friday night. And then I have a quote here, and Jessica nodded and continued to smile sympathetically. And then she said, "You're going to think I'm absolutely awful, but I have a really dreadful memory for faces. Give me a second and I know I'll get it." So,
just like not listening to him at all, like just so
because she doesn't know who he is,
right,
so she's probably like, "Who is this guy and why is he telling me about all this stuff?" And
exactly.
But she's being pleasant and like, "Okay, yeah."
She's still trying to place a face, and she gets close. She gets real close.
Yeah. And he walked away out the door and down the corridor. He was almost at the lift when she called his name, Richard. He turned. It had been a joke, some kind of petty revenge, something he could explain. Richard Maybury? She seemed proud of herself for remembering that much. "Mayhew," said Richard, and he got into the elevator, and the doors sang a sad, fluting downward trill as they closed behind him.
Yeah, so
she's
forgotten
him too.
Yeah, that was him fully accepting okay, this is real. Like,
yeah.
I have nothing now.
Yeah, so then he returns to his apartment, and he's accepting that, or he knows that something's happening, that he's not.
The world.
Something in his world's changing. He doesn't get it.
Machines reject him. People reject him. It's like
he definitely hasn't accepted it because later on he outright says this isn't happening.
Yeah,
but he's understanding that something is going on.
I think he says that when people start trying to move into his apartment.
Yeah. He returns to his apartment. He takes a bath. Someone enters the apartment to show it to a couple as if it's on the market.
Yeah.
They don't see him or hear him when he tries to talk to them. That's when he says, "This can't be happening," or "This isn't happening." And then the phone rings. He's replaced it with like a bat phone that he got
for Christmas. Yeah.
And then he answers it, and it's Mr. Krupp. They have a short conversation. Partway through it, Mr. Mayhew, Mr. Mayhew, you said Dora wasn't with you. We have reason to believe that you were embroidering the truth more than perhaps a little. Well, you said you were her brother. All men are brothers, Mr. Mayhew. I don't know that that's going to matter. That just seems like such a specific line.
That sounds like something kind of culty.
Yeah.
All men are brothers.
Or even potentially later on, it'll be revealed that, in at least in some context that we know about, in a Christian sense, all men are brothers. Mm-hmm. Everybody stems from Adam and Eve, no matter how far back you go, in the Christian belief. Right. So there's a precedent for this sort of like idea, but the fact that it just seems like a line that may or may not be important. We'll see. Even if it's just like a belief system that has to do with their faction, it might give into an understanding of whatever their faction is. Croup knows that Dora's no longer there, says that they're going to kill her anyways, says they're going to kill Richard. Richard phones the police. They can't hear him.
Yeah, he still doesn't exist. He forgets that he doesn't exist because he has a conversation with somebody and he just turns back. Everything goes back to normal for a second, and then he's like, wait a minute.
Right, like almost like, and maybe this is something I thought of on my second reading, maybe like he in that moment is like, well, maybe people can understand me on the phone or something that. Yeah. Because up until that point, that's the only time that he was able to get through to somebody. Mm-hmm. But then he calls, and he can't even be heard anymore. Well, previously, he was able to be heard, by Gary, by Sylvia at the office,
least heard,
by Jessica in person. Now, whenever the people are coming into the office, they don't even see him. Or, I'm sorry, the apartment, not the office. Whenever they're being shown the apartment, he's like in the bath. They don't even see him. He's naked. So it's getting worse and worse and worse with time. Then he gets brought back. He's like, oh man, somebody can hear me on the phone. But it's Mr. Croup, so whatever. And then he tries to call the police, and again, they can't hear him. So just kind of like, I guess maybe it's a reiteration of the fact that he's fading.
Then it talks about how he has accepted it, and then how he copes with it. So it says, with some deliberation, he took the black sports bag from under the bed and put socks into it, underpants, some t-shirts, his passport, his wallet. He was wearing jeans, sneakers, a thick sweatshirt. He remembered the way the girl who called herself Dora had said goodbye, the way that she had paused, the way that he had said the way that she had said that she was sorry.
Yeah, you knew, he said to the empty apartment, you knew this would happen. So he realizes that's why Dora and the Marquis knew that this would be happening. That's why they kept telling him, don't ask questions, don't find out any more that you can't have to, because the more that you step in, the harder it's going to be to get out of it. And so he's getting stuff ready to leave. Who knows what he thinks he's going to do, but he's just like, well, I can't stay here if someone else is going to move in. I don't know what's happening. I'm gone. He goes to an ATM to try to withdraw money. The machine doesn't take his card. He walks by a homeless man asking for change. He says, well, you can have my card. There's 1,500 pounds in there if you can get at it. And they have a short conversation about that, which Richard then says, you can see me.
Nothing wrong with my eyes, said the man. Listen, said Richard. Have you ever heard of a place called the Floating Market? I need to get there. There's a girl called Dora. But the man had begun, nervously, to back away from Richard. Look, I really need help, said Richard. Please. This is the first guy that is given instant feedback.
They can see him after everything, so Richard knows, maybe he knows about everything in this weird world.
Yeah, maybe he knows about this new stuff. Otherwise he's going to start, kissing mice and calling pigeons or something.
Ultimately, the guy says, hey, come on, and they go through a door. The door leads them into a hall with high vaulted ceilings. There's a bunch of people in various places in the hall, eating, and there's fires and stuff. A man scurries over to Richard's guide. Who have you brought us, Iliaster? Talk. He's from the upside, said the guide. Was asking about Lady Dora and the floating market. Brought him to you, Lord Ratspeaker. Figured you'd know what to do with him. At this point, many people have surrounded them. Lord Ratspeaker pulls out a sliver of glass and holds it to Richard's throat. Oh, yes. I know exactly what to do with him. That's the end of the chapter.
Yeah, that's the cliff that we were hung on.
Several things. We know there's magic. We know it's another society. He no longer belongs in the regular society. And from here on out, he's going into the other society, and this is where the adventure begins.
Yeah, we don't know if necessarily he's in trouble either, because if it was Harry Potter, he'd be in trouble and they'd be removing his mind. It seems like they can't make him forget.
Yeah, I don't think it's like an artificial mind control thing. It's a knowledge of the other world that takes you out of the real world, or our world.
Yeah.
And we don't know what's going to happen with this the Lord Ratspeaker dude. It seems like such a classic misdirection where he holds, effectively a knife to his throat and is like, oh, I know what to do with him.
Yeah.
And then one of two things is going to happen. It's going to be like, and then he steps back and they all laugh at him and he like awkwardly laughs with them. Or maybe the Marquis shows up and he's like, hey, he's with me, rescues him or whatever.
Yeah.
We don't know this Lord Ratspeaker's affiliation, but this is a classic like cliffhanger that's going to be a setup for one of those two archetypal sort of things to happen.
Yeah. Right before he meets Lord Ratspeaker, he talks about how like going down into this like underworld, like it felt like hell to him. Like it was his mental picture of what hell was like as a kid, and I thought that was kind of neat. And then when he was down there, it was like this smoke from them probably burning these like little rats that they were cooking and eating, and these people look like they're part rat, because it even talks about how they move around kind of
everybody seems to have some sort of like animalistic feature to them. Old Bailey was kind of like a bird. He lived on a rooftop.
Yeah, I didn't even think about Old Bailey.
The Croup and Vandemar are described as fox and a wolf. Even the way that they like sort of talk, where Croup has like a very sleazy and slimy way of talking. It's described a couple of times. Vandemar is just completely flat. And then the only person so far that doesn't have any sort of animalistic characteristic was Dor.
Yeah, and I guess Richard himself, unless you want to think of him as like the good old boy, like the good dog, but he doesn't sniff or anything. Like I don't think Richard has any.
They haven't given him anything, but he's from the regular world.
Yeah, he's just in.
Everybody from the other world so far has been given some level of animalistic characteristic, or at least the ones that seem to spend all their time there. Because the homeless man that takes them there isn't described as having anything; he's just a homeless man.
Yeah.
But then they get there, and there's people that are doing everything there. They're all like rat-ish, and then the Lord Ratspeaker comes
very
in
obvious.
like, he's very obviously like rat-y. So there's some sort of, and then the one time when Dora's like, I guess you could call them men. So the people on the other side may or may not be fully human or whatever it is. That will be further revealed later on, I'm sure.
Yeah, that'll be fun to learn sort of what each person, and maybe we do know about Dor. Maybe we do know like what kind of animal like she relates to, or maybe that
they may give us more
matter,
stuff later on to know. But she's also seemingly some level of royalty.
That's the word I was going to use, royalty,
so
not necessarily just class. It seemed like, well, I guess status goes with class, but
well, they talk about her as Lady Dor. The Marquis kneels to her, and she's being. So they seem to be like some sort of overthrown royal family.
That's why she needed.
Everybody in her family was killed, and so now Croup and Vandemar, that are a part of the faction that overthrew the royalty, are looking for her to finish off the last of the line, so that their faction can consolidate their power,
fully take over.
That seems to be where we're headed.
It's cool. There's a lot of potential. Like we were talking about earlier. It was cool for me to go back and redo it so much. I think this next time we go through, I'll try and take a few more phone notes, maybe even take some screenshots of some timestamps and different things that stood out to me a little more, because I did need to reread a bunch. I think 3 chapters was pretty good. So
we'll just be reading chapters 4 and 5 this week.
Yeah, you get up to chapter 6, so stop when you hear Richard wrote a diary. But anyway, I guess we'll close it out. You can find us at our Twitter, at ears_stamps.
Yes.
And we're coming out every Wednesday.
Yeah, we publish the episodes on Wednesdays. Everything so far is still only on SoundCloud and iTunes. We're waiting on the approval to come back from Google Play podcasts, but evidently that can take as long as 10 days for that approval process to happen.
Yeah.
It's now been 6 days. So we'll see. I'll be posting about it on our Twitter account whenever it does go live on Google Play as well. But we're on SoundCloud at Dog Ears and Timestamps. Use the ampersand, not the word and.
Yeah.
And then same on iTunes.
Yeah.
I guess that's it for the week. Thank you everybody for listening. Let us know what you think, if you have any thoughts about how we're doing it. I'm sure this will continue to evolve and change in different ways as we get more comfortable and find a pace that goes well. Leave us reviews on iTunes.
Oh yeah, please leave a review.
Contact us on Twitter if you want.
Do that. Yeah, we want this to be an active community. I want you guys to feel like involved, because He needs you to be. I mean, we're in a book club. We're in a club together, you know? So.
And let us know what you're thinking about the chapters that we're reading as well, because it'll be interesting to hear what other people think aside from just us.
Oh, yeah. That's the best part about it. So.
All right. Well, we'll talk to you next Wednesday, or I guess you'll hear from us next Wednesday. I'm Will Hedrick.
And I'm Jordan Chaffer.
And this is Dog Ears and Timestamps.
See you next week.